Hello everyone, and welcome back to our Budget Builds monthly series. It's September. You know what that means? We're back to doing a Budget Build SuperCut video. Just like every other time, we're going to go into some details of what's different from our standard Budget Builds monthly videos, and then we'll get into building out these PCs. So let's get into it. So the reason for Budget Builds monthly SuperCut is because I didn't want people to have to wait a couple of years to see what their PC request build would be like. So instead of doing once a month, I'm just going to take a handful and build out in these SuperCut videos. I did specify in the first episode of this season, every third month will be a SuperCut video, depending on how much requests we have to go through. But they will vary from SuperCut to SuperCut. Now, this being a SuperCut video, I won't go into too much depth like I normally do on each Budget Builds monthly episode. I'm actually just going to do the PC build, list out some pros and cons, maybe check out the used market, but it won't be a full in-depth build like I normally do. Whether you're new to the channel or you've seen our other Budget Builds monthly videos before, I'm just going to outline quickly what we touch upon. Posting the first Monday of every month, I review your budget request submitted via the Google form down in the description below. Using this information and PCPartPicker, I try to build the best bang for the buck PC within your budget, considering any constraints or platform preferences you may have. We usually make 4 builds, 2 AMD and 2 Intel, using either DDR4 or DDR5. We also check for deals on Micro Center and Newegg to see if we can modify the build to create a better PC within your budget. If possible, we also take a look at the used marketplace too. Next, we compare each build using online benchmarks and list out the pros and cons of the top options. This helps us figure out which build is best for you. And don't forget, we can't do any of this without your input. Speaking of the input, let's see how we fill out the Budget Builds request form. Now, a quick disclaimer to go with this. Budget builds will be as close or slightly over the budget due to parts and availability, as well as sales going on at the recorded time. In case you forgot or you're new to the channel, this is how we fill out the Budget Builds request form. For your privacy, we do not collect your Google information. Just don't worry about that. You actually don't have to sign in. Budget builds do not include taxes, fees, or Windows keys unless specifically asked otherwise. Budgets will be in USD. Now, form factor preference, this will determine case size, as in this is the motherboard size we're going to pick. If you want a mini ITX motherboard, we will go with a mini ITX case, unless you want us to get a micro ATX motherboard, and then a specific case size, just put here in other. For CPU and GPU preferences, if you want us to build an Intel only system or an AMD only system, and same thing for their graphics cards. If you have any other preferences or requests when it comes to CPU or GPU, like an Intel GPU, just put it here in the other category. Areas of focus just covers the hierarchical standpoint of how we're going to build out the system and spread that budget. If you want us to focus first on your CPU, then your motherboard, maybe your graphics card, we're just going to put the budget more focused towards those. Focus first, and then focus last. We'll just grab some generic and placeholder items for you, the user, to actually pick out later on. For already purchased our own system components, if you already have a power supply or a case or anything like storage, just put it here. Just specify specifically what you have, just so we can work that into the build and we don't have to worry about putting money towards something in that budget that you already have. No sense in buying 2 PC cases if you can just use the one you already have. For peripherals, if you are requesting any, like a mouse, a keyboard, a monitor, a headset, just press on the peripheral, and then the other just request what kind. For example, if you want a 1440p monitor, just hit monitor and then press 1440p in here. And then other request, no RGB, or anything else you want us to know, just press in the other and then hit submit. And that pretty much concludes filling out the Google form. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comment section below. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's check out what kind of system we're building out in this month's episode. Alright, for the month of September, we're going to go through 5 total build responses. So let's see what they are. Starting with response 1, this user has a budget of 1000 USD, wants a gaming type of system, ATX form factor preference, AMD CPU and video graphics card, focusing pretty much equal on all the parts, no already owned or purchased system components, wants a mouse, keyboard, monitor, and headset, and has a request of RGB. Alright, so we have a pretty decent size budget to work with. ATX is pretty standard. An AMD CPU with an NVIDIA graphics card will limit us to just one type of platform. But all in all, it's not too bad. The only thing that's going to eat away at most of our budget is the peripheral of mouse, keyboard, monitor, and headset, as all of these are pretty much user preferences. Well, the mouse, keyboard, and headset are. The monitor, we can just pick up a basic, 1080p, 100 Hz refresh rate, especially since we got that 1000 USD budget. Alright, so now that we know what the user wants, let's see what kind of system we can build out. So before we go and build our first build here, I just wanted to do a small template as we needed to find a monitor, keyboard, and headset, as well as just add some extra stuff like our power supply and case. So most of these are placeholders, except for the monitor. This one I would actually recommend, or at least something within this price point, as it's a 1080p 65 Hz 1 millisecond response rate, 24-inch monitor. But we have the Zalman S2 ATX mid-tower case, a 750 watt power supply from Corsair, fully modular, and then a placeholder keyboard of the HyperX Alloy and the SteelSeries Arctis Prime headset. Now, I just wanted to list this out first to see what we were dealing with. Now, our $1,000 budget is almost cut in half, as we used $341.85 for all of these placeholder items. Now, if we were to take this and actually build something out, we have the Ryzen 7 5800X. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 3.8 GHz boosted to 4.8. We have the MSI MPG B550 Gaming Plus ATX AM4 motherboard. I believe this does have Wi-Fi. A 16 gig kit of DDR4 3200 CL16. A 500 GB M.2 SSD from Kingston. An RTX 3060 12 gig. And then the rest of the placeholders that we have here for $941.80. Now currently this build is $59 under our budget, but because of promos and everything, if these were to go away, it would actually be $16 under our budget. Now you can try to move a couple of these components around, but the main core gaming system is here. You want to spend a little bit more on that CPU, a little bit more on that graphics card, a little bit more on that motherboard, but things like storage you can change out or add later on. A case is something you don't want to kind of buy twice. I mean, you kind of don't want to buy anything twice. But this pretty much is a good build to actually play some games on. Fortunately, you will be limited with that storage though. Now, for brand new builds, I always suggest going with the latest and greatest DDR5 platform. But with such a tight budget, it's actually very difficult to go AM5. You end up spending a little bit more overall. Now, to swap out the memory, the motherboard, and the CPU would probably end up being, let's say, $200 over that budget. Which, at that point, it's up to the user, but they did specify a $1,000 budget to work with. So it all depends on what you want to do. Now, I may or may not compare each of these builds later on. To me, there's no reason to. I'm only going to compare builds against each other. So let's say I was able to do a AM5 build or a DDR5 build overall. I would actually just compare this AM4 and AM5. But I digress. Now let's move on to build 2. For user 2, we have a budget of 2000 USD, combination working gaming system, form factor preference of ATX, AMD GPU with no CPU preferences, focusing first on that CPU and graphics card, then our motherboard and power supply. Has an AOC 276 QZD QHD OLED monitor. Thank you for letting me know you have a QOLED monitor. And wants us to find a keyboard with no RGB request, but also specifies they don't care about the aesthetics of the physical PC. They only matter about the performance. Says the French, so translating price from euros to dollar is around 1800 euros. The lower the price, the better. So we'll be building this for, we'll pretty much do $1,800 USD, just so at least we have a little bit of headroom to work with for the overall budget. But we are looking for no RGB, get a keyboard, and overall a decent spec out build with an AMD GPU. Alright, now that we know what this user wants, let's see what we can build. Now for this budget, I wanted to do an AM4 build as well, but I figured since we have more money to work with, we'll just stick with an AM5 as I can get some pretty good hardware. Speaking of, for our CPU, we have the Ryzen 7 9800X3D. It's an 8-core, 16-thread, 4.7 GHz boost into 5.2. For motherboard, we have the MSI Pro B650S Wi-Fi ATX motherboard. For memory, we got the G-Skill Flare X5 32GB kit of DDR5 6000 CL36 with a 1TB Crucial P3 Plus. And then for a graphics card, we have the RX 7900 XT, good card. And then for our case, power supply, and keyboard, we kind of took a little bit of inspiration from our previous build. Now for something like this, I may recommend you actually upgrading this to an 850 watt power supply because we have room in that budget, but I was kind of trying to build this out for the user so they had a little bit more of a kind of gap to work with that total budget, as they specified it was 1800 euros. So I figured, well, if we make the total build less than the 2000, they'll still have some room to play with and add whatever they wanted. All right, let's take a look at build 3. Moving on to our third build. This user has a budget of $500 USD, gaming type of system, mini ITX form factor preference, Intel CPU with no graphics card preference. Wants us to focus on that graphics card first before anything else. Has an i14-600K, 32GB of RAM. This is interesting. So I believe it's an i7 or an i9 14600K. And 32GB of RAM. Unfortunately, they didn't specify DDR4 or DDR5. I presume it's going to be DDR4. But at this point, we'll build out two spec budgets. One with the 32GB of DDR4 RAM. One build with 32GB of DDR5 RAM, just in case. But I presume the user has DDR4 RAM. And then no RGB for request with no peripherals. So I know I went on a little bit about this, but we seem to have a good start point. So let's build out this DDR4 and DDR5 variant of this build. So for this build, the user said they have an i5 14600K. I'm unsure if they have a cooler, and it didn't leave any room in the budget to add one in case they didn't. But the 14600K is a 14-core, 20-thread, 3.5 GHz boost into 5.3. For motherboard, we have the Asus Prime H610i. It's a mini ITX LG1700 motherboard. Comes with Wi-Fi, at least I hope it does. For memory, we have the Team Group T-Force Vulcan 16GB kit of DDR4 3200 CL16. Now this is a placeholder. The user specified they had a 32GB kit, so I just kind of slapped some placeholder memory for the moment. And then for storage, we have the Crucial P3 Plus 500GB M.2 SSD. For our video card, we have the RX 6600 8GB ASRock AMD card. And then our case is a Cooler Master Box Q300L Micro ATX Mini Tower case, more of a placeholder. And then our power supply is an 80 plus bronze 650 watts. And all in all, it's not too bad, especially because you have that CPU and memory already. Moving on to build 4. This user has a budget of $600 USD, gaming type system, no preferences for CPU graphics card. Focusing first on that case, very interesting. Scrolling down, see no already owned or purchased system components, no peripherals, and no requests other than no RGB. So for $600 and gaming, I have a little bit of a sweet spot when it comes to bundle deals, and unfortunately maybe pre-builds, but we'll see what we can do. We are limited in both budget and no already owned system components, but we'll see what we can do. $600. So for build 4, we picked an i5 14400F. It's a 10 core, 16 thread, 2.5 GHz boosted to 4.7. Good thing is it does have an included cooler. For motherboard, we went with the ASRock 8610M, micro ATX LGA 1700 motherboard. User didn't have any preference on size, so we're just stricken with that budget. We went with the Team Group T-Force Vulcan Z 16 gig kit of DDR4 3200 CL16. This time we grabbed it because that's what we needed instead of a placeholder from before. For storage, we got that crucial P3 Plus 5GB M.2 SSD. Got a video card and a power supply. Now there's some crucial, funny item missing in this entire list, and that is a case. Now, the only way we'd be able to actually grab a case is if we were to remove the graphics card and get a better CPU that would actually incorporate integrated graphics, as this one does not. So unfortunately for $600, we are a little bit tight in that budget, meaning we wouldn't be able to grab a graphics card, especially for gaming. Now something like this, I would suggest seeing if you can find a pre-built, but even then you're kind of stuck with whatever configuration they have. And then there's always the opportunity of going to Micro Center and maybe getting a bundle deal. But maybe I'll play around with this. I'll see if I can get a different build, and then we will finalize it out in the description below. Now on to our final build. And for our final budget build, we have again 1000 USD, combination working gaming system, ATX form factor preference. For some reason, we are preferring an Intel CPU and an AMD CPU. Focusing first on case again, and then everything else. Already purchased our own system components, a 0.5 TB M.2 SSD, no peripherals, and an RGB request. So I am going to, I believe, build one on Intel and one on AMD. And because they didn't specify graphics card preferences, we'll just build one on one and one on the other. So it's kind of similar to that first build that we look at, but we're going to modify a couple things. So let's see what we got. And then to finish things out, here's our final build. For our CPU, we have the Ryzen 9 5900X. It's a 16 core, 32 thread, 3.3 GHz boosted to 4.8. For motherboard, we have the MSI Mag MPG B550 Gaming Plus ATX AM4 motherboard. Memory, we went with the RGB kit of Corsair Vengeance Pro, 16 gig kit of DDR4 3200 CL16. We picked up a Crucial P3 Plus 1TB PCIe NVMe SSD. I also added a placeholder Kingston 500GB M.2 SSD to make sure we had enough lanes for our M.2s. You could also get a SATA drive as well, but I just added the user specified M.2. For our graphics card, this was a bit interesting. I picked up an RTX 3060 12 gig, but I also tried to see if we can get a 3070. Anything newer than this is going to be way over our budget. But for the pricing of a 3070 versus a 3060, yes, we will be over our budget, but actually not too much. I think it's going to be $120 over that budget, or maybe even less. But we do have the option of upgrading to a 3070 for not that much more. And then our case, we got that Zalman S2 ATX mid-tower case. Nice placeholder. And then a same Corsair RM750E we've been running for most of our builds. Now we are under that budget, but we still have that promo going on for most of these components. So the build is still in that spot of right under $1,000, gives the user some leeway to work with, as well as if they want to see about upgrading to a 3070. Now, because we didn't have to get peripherals, we were able to build an AM5 system, which brings us to the Ryzen 5 7600, 6-core, 12-thread, 3.8 GHz boost into 5.1. We have the MSI Pro B650S Wi-Fi ATX AM5 motherboard, a 32GB kit of G-Skill Flare X5, DDR5 6000 CL36. Picked up a Crucial P3 Plus 1TB PCIe 4.0x4 NVMe SSD. I didn't add the user M.2 for this one. It's fine. There was no added cost. For the final build, link in the description below will have that user added storage. Got that same RTX 3060 case and power supply. And just like before, we are under that $1,000 budget. Now, the difference between this and our previous build is the AM4 system is going to be way better for that $1,000 than the AM5 system. Now, even though I recommend upgrading to the latest and greatest, if you're building a fresh system out, for such a budget, even if it were less, you're probably better off getting this AM4 system. Here we have our CPU comparison. We have our Ryzen 9 5900 XT and our Ryzen 5 7600. And you can see that it's about 1.5 times the score as the Ryzen 5 7600. It's a minus 40% pretty much difference between the two CPUs. We get 10 more cores, 20 more threads. Yes, it does cost quite a bit more to run this yearly. But all in all, I would go for this AM4 system, especially if you're going to be doing some resource heavy tasks instead of just gaming. And that brings us to the end. And for our final decision for all of our builds, for build 1, we have the Ryzen 7 5800 XT. Build 2 brought us the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D. Build 3, we kept the user's i5 14600K. Build 4 was pretty difficult as we were using a little bit older components, but we still were able to build some. And then build 5 brought us our Ryzen 9 5900 XT. Now all of these will be in the description below. And that brings us to the end. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to fill out that Google form. Like if you like this, if you dislike it, and I'll see you all in the next video.